Next, in the second installment of our two-part series on President Yoon Suk-yeol's 100-day in office, we walk back in time to the day of his inauguration and the events that followed over the past 100 days. My colleague Connyoung reports.
대통령으로서의 직책을 성실히 수행할 것을 국민 앞에 엄숙히 선서합니다.
100 days ago, this country saw its first prosecutor-general-turned-politician take the oath of office for presidency, a political novice who had won a close election by a margin of less than 1%, the narrowest margin ever.
저는 자유, 인권, 공정, 연대의 가치를 기반으로 국민이 진정한 주인인 나라, 국제사회에서 책임을 다하고 존경받는 나라를 위대한 국민 여러분과 함께 반드시 만들어 나가겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Change. Roughly 100 days ago, South Koreans ushered in Yoon Suk-yeol as their new president with the conviction that he's the one who can and will bring about the much-needed changes to the nation, the society, their daily lives. 100 days later, it may not be so life-changing, but there are some changes being seen in different parts of the society. For instance, up until 3 months ago, this part of the presidential Blue House had been off-limits to the public for decades. Now, it's open for anyone to enjoy, as Mr. Yoon made good on his campaign pledge that he'd return this beautiful space, embracing every bit of Korea's modern history, back to the people.
This as a newly elected Yoon Suk-yeol kicked off his presidency at the relocated presidential office in a former defense ministry complex in Seoul's Yongsan district.
일단 청와대 경내로 들어가면 제왕적 권력의 상징인 청와대를 벗어나는 것이 더욱 어려워질 것이라고 생각합니다. 용산 대통령 집무실의 1층에 프레스 센터를 설치해서 수시로 언론과 소통하는 대통령이 되겠습니다.
Almost every morning before he starts work, South Korea's new president stops to chat with a scrum of journalists camped in the lobby of his presidential office.
1층에도 다 지금 취했어요? 네. 책상도 다 마련하고 잘 좀 부탁합니다.
Standing in front of a row of flashing cameras, boom microphones, and reporters trying to outshout one another, Yoon offers opinions on a range of issues, both serious and lighthearted.
야당도 새 지도부 구성안 시점 지원해서 만남을 제안할 의향이 있습니다.
어려움을 헤쳐나가는데 여야가 따로 있겠습니까? 수고하십시오.
During the first 100 days in office, Yoon has held 38 so-called doorstepping sessions. That compares with Park Geun-hye's 7 press conferences throughout her term, and even a lot more than his predecessor, Moon Jae-in, who entered office pledging excellent communication with the public. Even so, President Yoon has faced a bumpy political honeymoon.
In South Korea, usually the trajectory of public approval is directly relevant to the time that you have remaining in office. And so it means that usually presidents start with a relatively high approval rating, and then usually it declines as the president's time in office diminishes and as he begins to lose power. And so what's a little bit interesting and different about the Yoon presidency is that he has had this early dip.
What began as an approval rating of 52% in his first week in office was down to 24% by the first week of August, or only half of the 48.6% he won in votes during the election. In another poll, he saw a slight bump in the second week of August with a rating of just above 30%.
And there have been a lot of stories out there, in particular about personnel appointments that might not necessarily be fully based on merit, but might be based on connections.
You cannot just simply decide on a policy and announce it the same day. There has to be a lot of work that goes into understanding the public. And if you're going to announce a policy initiative, you should do your own internal polling to figure out where the public stands. You need to work with the National Assembly because it's controlled by the opposition. You need to consider the labor aspect of this.
The other issue, of course, is that there's been a lot of discord within the conservative camp, in particular over the party leadership. And Yoon has been caught a little bit in a bad look in terms of his relationship with his party.
But every cloud has a silver lining.
In foreign policy, I think that Yoon has done well with the United States and has had an acceptable introduction to the international community. And he essentially receives an incomplete on relations with Japan, China, and North Korea. If we look at Yoon's foreign policy priorities, and we look at South Korean public opinion, it actually looks like Yoon is doing a lot of what the South Korean public wants and expects.
And one of the things that he's going to have to do if he wants to start to recover in his approval rates is he's going to have to think carefully about how you go about governing, how you roll out policies, and how you take into account public reaction to those policies. If he can do that and really start to understand what this job looks like, then I think he can kind of smooth out the rest of the first year and then build into the second and the third year, which is going to be especially important headed into the 2024 National Assembly elections.
And the issues on which I think the South Korean public expects performance the most are in terms of solving a lot of fundamental economic problems related to real estate, related to jobs. And the problem is that those issues that he really needs to deal with most effectively are issues that are being negatively affected by the backdrop of the global economy and in particular rising global inflation.
South Korean presidencies have a tendency of ending in disgrace. Elected in one of the closest races since the restoration of democracy in 1987, the South Korean people handed the prosecutor of nearly 3 decades the presidency in hopes that he will be a president unlike any of his predecessors. That his lack of elected political experience will serve as more of an asset than a liability. Now that was 100 days ago. The first 100 days is just a tiny fraction of a 5-year South Korean presidential term. How this nation will remember him, or history will record Yoon Suk-yeol, the 20th president of the Republic of Korea, will depend on the many more 100 days to come. Connyoung, Arirang News.